Hello, I'm Eric Walenza, founder of IoT One, and this is the Industrial IoT Spotlight. Every episode, I interview one expert about a project that is impacting businesses today. Visit us at iot1.com to learn more, or email me to start a discussion. Welcome back to the Industrial IoT Spotlight. I'm joined again by Steve Dertien. Steve is CTO for CAD and PLM business at PTC. In the last episode, we spoke with Steve about PTC's business and the market in general. Today, we're going to be focusing specifically on the IoT suite of technology at PTC. Steve, to kick off, give us a look at what PTC's IoT portfolio looks like. So obviously, there's ThingWorx. What else would you consider? IoT is somewhat of a concept that is difficult to define in terms of technology products. It could be vast in scope and include things like PLCs potentially or PLMs. It could also be defined much more narrowly. How do you define it at PTC?
So maybe before getting into the product names that we associate it with, maybe we can kind of classify how PTC looks at the domain problems in IoT, and we break that down into 5 buckets, if you will. So this idea of sourcing information, right? So you mentioned PLCs. We acquired a company a little while ago called Kepware. They're kind of think of it as having drivers for all of the industrial controls and PLCs and so forth that might exist on an OT network that would give us access to that information inside of a factory and much, much more, quite frankly. Sourcing data from IoT agents and SDKs that are embedded on embedded systems operating inside products, whether it's the appliances that might be in your home or medical equipment and so forth that's out in an environment. So think these are products that are outside the control of your IT OT network as an organization. They're just kind of freely out there in the world. And then over the last year and a half, we've also been working with Amazon and Azure in terms of their IoT strategy, where they have their respective IoT capabilities for putting agents into products and pumping data into the cloud effectively. That we can source that data as well directly from their IoT capabilities to take advantage of it inside ThingWorx. Moving on to the next part, and I would say that this is kind of where we start to separate ourselves from the likes of Amazon and Azure and start to provide additional value even to a customer that's using Amazon and Azure in that respect, or industrial controls is this idea of contextualizing. So think of it as like a data model. How does all this data come in? How do I want to manage it? How do I want to relate it? And now you can start to organize not just the device data coming in, but also digital information coming from ERP systems and PLM systems and so forth. I left that out of source. Probably should have added the idea that both information coming from a physical device as well as digital information coming from systems that you already have are amazingly valuable to IoT use cases. Once you get past kind of understanding and organizing how that data works, if you will, the third part of our platform strategy is to synthesize it. So this is where your big data analytics, AI, if you have an AI understanding of your product and your data. It's also where we start to take a look at simulation. So the world is kind of caught on the idea of big data, but with engineered products, there's a treasure trove of data that can be unlocked through for instance, like finite element analysis and QFD and a bunch of things from products like ANSYS and Simulink and a number of things where these tools have a lot of physics-based understanding built into them. And so taking that data and then understanding, what that impact would be. And there's a variety of different use cases there, but the idea that you should be able to route this data to any of these different systems to help make a decision. And then once you know what that outcome is, to then move on to the fourth thing that we would say is orchestrate. So if you know that a pump is about to fail based on its operating conditions, the predictive model, and maybe kind of an assessment of the physics understanding of that product, you would understand that, hey, this takes 3 to 5 days to service it. Here's where my inventory comes from. This is I need to go dispatch a technician. And so how do I orchestrate with all of the business systems that get that process moving? And then the last part, so in the fifth part, and I'll recap these again, is really an engagement. So engagement is simply from a human point of view, whether it's a email that I send to you to let you know that something's going on, or a text message, all the way up to kind of those 2D web mobile type applications that allow you to see that data. And then what we think is transformative as well is experiencing that through augmented reality. So one thing that we have on our IoT platform that nobody else really has at the moment is this idea of marrying AR with IoT, and then having a really immersive way to experience that data. And so, giving you the 5 back again, it's for PTC, we organize it by source, contextualize, synthesize, orchestrate, and engage. And then our product offerings are kind of centered around different combinations of those 5 elements.
If we look at one of the offerings in particular, so ThingWorx, which 8 just launched recently, how do you differentiate ThingWorx from other platforms? I think a report came out recently that cataloged 450 IoT platforms. From my standpoint, as a company that is trying to track the ecosystem and help to clarify, I think platforms are potentially the most difficult technology, because if you look at the marketing material, tends to be quite similar bullet points in terms of describing what functionality they offer, and it's quite difficult for a customer to get under the hood and test out a solution before they make an investment. Even if they do manage to test it out, you have to go quite deep in terms of implementation before you can potentially really see how does one platform differ from another in terms of ability to scale and so forth. So which differentiation points among IoT platforms do you believe are important and points that customers need to understand and to an extent investigate and test before making a decision?
Yes, that's a fully loaded question, but completely spot on. So I would say our ThingWorx 8 release, what we focused on, we use the word integral, right? So of those 5 things that I mentioned, we wanted to make sure that ours clicks together the best. So when you say, I want to get data from PLCs, organize that, and then create it quickly in an app that allows a control engineer or a maintenance engineer or a plant manager to see that, that you literally can get that solution deployed in an hour. You can build the apps, extra apps that you need in maybe a couple hours or a couple days. And for customers that are doing even more sophisticated things, click together a larger capability in a matter of maybe a few weeks. And so this idea of integral leads to the ability to do that at speed, to leverage those technologies. I love Amazon and Azure, and their platform has amazing capability and breadth, right? Nobody would question 120, 140 plus services that Azure has, and similar equivalency on Amazon. But the ability for that to click together, their IoT offering kind of gets you started, but then you have to bring in a whole bunch of other things to kind of bootstrap and get moving. And I don't consider them equal. I think if you took ThingWorx and strapped it to Amazon or Azure's IoT and then went to work, you would find incredible value with that combination. So the other thing that is a little bit perplexing in the analyst reports that come out and so forth is we're looking at features. We're not looking at how customers are solving problems. And when you combine those two, you can actually solve some amazing problems together very, very quickly. So this is not a and or an or this is not necessarily an or option. It can be an and option to accelerate that value. But for us, it all stems from this integral notion that these things click together for us very quickly. But it's open. So if you have a use case where PTC doesn't have something in our technology stack, you have, let's say, a predictive model already running in Amazon that you want to take advantage of, you can wrap your arms around that very, very quickly and create that extensibility. So you're not locked in any way.
Interesting point. Yeah, I was speaking with a director of a hardware OEM, a sensor manufacturer, and high-level strategy is focused right now on developing an IoT platform because they have the feeling that their categories might be becoming more commoditized, and in order to remain profitable in the future, they need to move into the software realm. But when we were discussing, we were thinking, well, what is the feasibility of this company that has no background in IT successfully developing an IoT platform that's going to compete with the likes of ThingWorx or Azure or any of the other platforms out there? What can a company that has a specialization in sensor technology and very deep vertical expertise in sensors do to play in the software space and not necessarily compete with these platforms, but to partner. And our conclusion was maybe it makes sense for them to focus on designing the best algorithms and then plugging in those algorithms where they make sense. And that's something where they have a competence that they can build upon. But I think this point of developing tools that plug into a system and are not standalone, very well taken. How do you see, let's say, ThingWorx 8 or in general, the IoT suite evolving in the future relative to competing ecosystems? Do you see the IoT market as being intrinsically different from past technologies where Siemens, for example, might be able to carve out a realm and to an extent control access and have quite a large share of revenue among systems? Do you see the IoT space being a space where there's going to be significantly more collaboration? Or do you think that as the technology matures, the industry consolidates, we might end up in kind of a similar competitive environment where we're going to have somewhat silos of companies that control particular groups of functionality or use cases and individual companies that have very large shares of revenue among particular solution areas?
I would say for on the front end of your question, for the small company, especially a hardware company kind of looking to get in, I would say a really diverse spectrum of companies in the IoT space that are kind of on that side, if you will. And when they're establishing like what value am I providing for an organization to choose me over the next one, there are some choices that those organizations kind of have to make in terms of do I actually create the IoT platform, or do I draw a fine line and say this is my area of specialized expertise. I'm going to build hardware that helps operators, and I'm going to build software that's really catered to the operators of that equipment. But when it comes to the IoT platform side of things, my software should work alongside with, or maybe even be integral with, ThingWorx. And like I said in our prior podcast, we do provide our technology stack so that others can embed it in their offering, right? That is part of our business model, is to say, look, you don't have to figure out all the hard stuff on an IoT platform like anybody else. You could, I'll selfishly say, you could certainly use ours if you found it, filling, if you will, for that use case. On the other end of the spectrum, you kind of asked a question in a roundabout way, but this right to play, right? So the Siemens of the world and the ABBs and the Bosches and so forth, they are surely going to be creating offerings in the in the space, particularly inside operational settings and so forth. And from that point of view, I think you're going to find buyer behaviors where they have these fantastic relationships with these big industrial automation suppliers, if you will. And I think they will leverage their technologies, but I don't find that to be exclusive. And in fact, in many cases, in talking with them, they don't have a total dominance footprint on the assets in a factory. They realize that factories are really well connected. They have heterogeneous equipment and capabilities. And so we're starting to see them offer APIs and access to their platforms so that customers can take advantage of those. We're starting to see, this idea that they're doing more heterogeneous activities as opposed to it only comes in a Siemens product. That's kind of a bold statement. I'm not speaking for Siemens here, but I think they'll have to deal with the diversity that exists in their offerings as well. But I think the big players, Microsoft, Amazon, Siemens, and so forth, will grab a big share of that space. And so the smaller ones will have to figure out, how does my strategy work, either with them, alongside them, incorporated into them, and so forth. And even PTC to an extent, we're doing the same.
So when you have these integrated systems, let's talk about data. What have you seen? So I guess this is not an answer that, or a question that we can answer in totality, but what have you seen in terms of ownership structures, access structures, monetization structures in these systems where multiple players have potential visibility or a stake in the data?
In cases where the data is just being used for an internal operational benefit, the factory operators, for example, would view that data as uniquely theirs when they're building and establishing the connectivity. What they're likely reluctant to do is to give you generically access to their data to learn and apply a use case. And they're fearful of organizations taking that knowledge and then selling it to their direct competitor and giving them the same advantage at a fraction of the price that they endured. So we're, for some of these new and I would say predictive and analytical types of use cases, that's very much the case. But when you find something that commoditizes out and somebody knocks on your door and says, look, I have a cloud-based IoT offering that allows for conditional monitoring of this piece of equipment. Here's the value that it provides, and the customer realizes that they're actually receiving that without having to give up a lot of IP or advantage, then they're more willing to likely engage with that. So I think it depends on where you're at on their continuum. Certainly when customers give data, they expect something back. So we give data to Microsoft in terms of those error reports. What we give back is not really a report, but we hopefully are getting back a better user experience. That's maybe on the simplest end of the spectrum. What we're seeing on the IoT side of the spectrum, though, is, and including in the connectedness that we have even in PTC's very own products, our own software is instrumented, is we not only get a little bit of data, but we provide visibility and access back to the customers to kind of understand that too. And once you start doing that, you'll see that a lot of organizations are creating their APIs to allow that sort of access as well, because I think customers have come to expect this idea that they get their data. The idea of ownership, however, is a different challenge, right? Who owns what? Who's entitled to what? How can it be used? I think that still varies by use cases, and I think the hardest ones are to figure out, like in the medical device space, who has rights to what particular chunk of data as it pertains to the patient, the product, and maybe other things that are around it in the environment and so forth.
IoT marketplaces, maybe through blockchain. Is that something on your radar? I've been there's a company, IOTA. I think there's a few other companies that are trying to use blockchain or other technologies to build marketplaces for IoT data, for data trade, exchange, potential monetization.
Yeah, it is on our radar. We've doing a little bit of internal research work. What I can say is, blockchain has it potentially can solve some problems, but if we were to whittle down like where people have found it worthy at the moment, is in a large network of parties that are participating, where the trust is either questionable, or you need like kind of a absolute assurance in that data moving back and forth. And so it's got to be a multi-party problem, right? You got to have multiple constituents kind of engaging, and they have to either have no direct access, amongst each other, or not really trustworthy of each other. Like if I were to send you money, Eric, I don't really know you that well. I am probably going to go through an intermediate that I know, like PayPal, to route money to you and so forth. And whereas if I were to send it directly through a blockchain, we're now trusting that the blockchain is keeping us both honest, if you will. So you need to find a business relationship that really expands on this idea of a network. And I contrast that with the organizational challenges that many have. And when it's in service networks and so forth, yes, it's a distributed organization, but whether or not there's a trust problem where blockchain truly solves a challenge there is something that we're testing in the market, if you will. On the flip side, I gave you a medical use case, and I think if you start to think about, who owns what particular, facets of data, how do I organize that so that a network of healthcare providers, right, your doctors, your technicians, the healthcare device manufacturers, the insurance companies, they need to have a trustworthy, understanding of the data, but not any one of them in particular, necessarily own it. Now, in the U.S., even the patients, don't technically own their data that's being collected about them, right? I'm pretty sure if you were to walk into your doctor's office and say, "I'd love to have access to all the data from all of my charts," they would look at you a little bit cross-eyed. So this in other countries, I think they're now basically establishing like the patient has rights to information that's about them, right? And so that could be a really, really interesting use case if you think about how IoT transforms the entire healthcare industry.
So if we put blockchain aside as one technology, but look more at monetization, are you seeing people building monetization solutions on top of ThingWorx or generally in the space? So if we look at this healthcare circumstance where, as a patient, I might not mind if somebody accesses my data for research or a particular purpose, and in particular if I'm able to get some sort of monetary benefit. Are you seeing that, or is this more conceptual or in the strategy offices right now, but not necessarily being implemented in
It's conceptual to a degree, but I've actually heard of one use case in China, ironically, that really pushed the limits on who owns what, who has rights to data. I won't name the companies, but basically a company created a monitoring solution for mining equipment in a large mine, and so they were able to understand, the engine data, fuel levels, and so forth. Then they approached the mine and said, if you were to give us a little bit of information about what your mining strategy is, where would you like to be at any point in time on any given day in that mine? As these, and think like really large dump trucks, really large excavators, and that sort of thing. And they said, yeah, sure, that sounds interesting. And what the problem they were trying to solve is managing where to put the fuel depots in that mine, because it takes time to drive that equipment at 1, 2, 3 miles an hour, out to a depot to fuel it and then bring it back down in the mine. And the fuel company said, look, I'll get this data from here, that data from you over there. And, the solution that I'm ultimately selling you is fuel management, right? I'm going to give you I'm going to deliver fuel at the right place in the mine based on your schedule and your use. Unbelievable outside of the box thinking from, not from the product manufacturer, not from the engine manufacturer, not from at all. They just came in here and did that. And, that kind of caught wind of the company that has all the engine monitoring stuff, saying, do you even have rights to that data? And you'll find, some other similar examples too, where think of like smart farming as an example. Monsanto makes no physical farming equipment. John Deere does, right? But Monsanto through a similar strategy, and I'm just using that as a brand name. I don't actually have direct insight to their strategy, but you could imagine that if Monsanto did the same similarly to equipment from John Deere and AGCO and the like, that they could sell smart farming solutions to put seeds in the ground and have a great yield and output on behalf of the farmer. And so suddenly the seed company has a stronger, more strategic relationship with the farmer than the actual product that is actually putting the seed in the ground, if you will. That's partly why you're seeing John Deere and others become these huge software organizations. In fact, they rival, if not are larger than the size of some of the largest software companies that are out there, because they need that component. But it begs the question: who has rights to data being exhausted off those products?
Yeah, I had a friend. This was about 5 years back in China, who was building energy sensors that they were installing on factories, and they were basically selling them at cost. And the intent was to collect energy information from factories as a leading indicator of energy prices on the commodity markets, and then sell that data through to Wall Street, which has a little bit of genius behind it. But I think they went bankrupt after basically maybe hitting the market a little bit too early, and
A little bit early.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and then you get into the energy rate. Everybody's been waiting on the variable based, energy rates and optimizing for schedules for those times. I think those, especially as solar and other renewable energies kind of come in, and you have to kind of manage your capacity, that starts to become interesting on how those relationships, come to bear. But I think a lot of it stems back to, these are all brilliant, ideas technologically speaking. Ultimately what customers need to understand is, what business value are they extracting, and are they getting the best deal for the dollar being spent? And as soon as, we have some real breakthroughs that kind of explain that in a non-esoteric way, this stuff will really grab hold. But as long as it's kind of marshy in terms of how you can wrap your arms around it, I think they will continue to be a very conservative group of decision makers.
Last question from my side on the technology front. For PTC in the IoT domain, what is on the horizon? If we look out 2018, 2019, what can you share about the technology development path?
I think you're going to definitely see more from the likes of Microsoft in terms of what they're doing on their IoT strategy and the capabilities and so forth. I think what you'll see from PTC is more things in the IoT realm that kind of orient themselves more towards the solutions. We would call them starter apps to a certain extent. Can I give you value like immediately as soon as you turn on the software? I'm solving a problem that you deeply value, like right away. And then the other thing I think we look at is the applicability of IoT use case wise is in the thousands of use cases we haven't even tapped yet. Many of them we refer to them as a snowflake problem, and I don't mean that in the political sense, but in a there are lots of challenges that customers have that they're unique, brilliant, and beautiful in their own right. They serve a relatively small population of people, but they're highly valuable use cases. the math or the calculus around, how do you exactly build an app that solves the needs of 5 people is not something that IT is going to take a 6-month project on to go and fulfill unless it has a huge reward. So we're looking at how do we make the technology extremely easy for those analysts to consume, to make it even easier for them to go and solve those challenges. We think we have a real big leg up in the market in terms of that, and I think we're that's one of the levers we'd like to continue pulling hard on, not just for the 2D web mobile aspect of things, but also, we think that how people need to build and advantage those AR experiences with IoT data, so that when they're looking at the physical thing, they get some insight that all would reap that reward. So I would expect to see us, at least at PTC, do a lot in kind of managing that better, and then obviously connecting to things, making more things connectable faster. Right now that is, I would say, the largest challenge with connected products is the speed at which organizations can bring those to market quickly. Part of that is just their normal R&D development process. Cycle times are 12, 18, 24 months. And then some of it is just technology familiarity, like how are they going to do it? They're doing something they've never done before. So I think a lot of effort there to make it easier and simpler to connect their products.
Love the focus. I was talking with a guy who's building an OS for IoT last week, and he likened the state of IoT today a little bit to an iPhone without a iTunes Market and with no apps, right? So you open it up and there's kind of a toolbox, and then it's, try to build something with this that you can make use of. And some companies are doing great things with that, but for a lot of companies, it's a bit too much effort right now, and we need to move into a state where you open it up and there's a toolbox, and you, as you said, you get value from day one.
Once you can kind of figure out how you're getting a little bit of value out of it, and like you've seen the path that's been blazed by others, I do think the industrial space itself has a few like early adopters. They're out there trying to pioneer and do amazing things at maybe considerable success, right? They're making a huge bet. But a lot of others are extremely conservative because their margin pressures and their operating pressures, especially in the various different economic climates, are such that they have to be their bets have to be really well placed. And like I said earlier, if we actually can show them value very, very quickly, they'll move on to that next step even quicker. And so they do intend to see a little bit more off the shelf than just raw aggregate technology for sure.
So Steve, you mentioned the AR solution. Where can people learn more about this in particular? I heard that there was a bit of a launch yesterday, actually.
Yeah, so again, on ThingWorx.com, there's a section, we call that product ThingWorx Studio. So PTC, just to recap on the AR side, we acquired a technology from Qualcomm a couple years back called Vuforia. It's one of the market-leading AR platform SDKs. So for people that are building like a hand-coded AR experience, and it works with a lot of the work that's going in with the recent announcements from both Apple and Google and so forth that we're working with as well. But that's still a very developer-oriented experience, and the challenge with that is scale, right? And so if you go to take a look at what we've done with ThingWorx Studio, and particularly with our customer base, where they have brilliant, full-on 3D, high-resolution information about their products, we've made it masterful in terms of how they can author an experience, and that you can author that experience for a mobile device, tablet, or HoloLens, and do it in a very low-code, no-code sort of way, and really, really mind-bending. The folks at Microsoft love, what's going on there. But yeah, definitely check it out. ThingWorx Studio. It's there's a free trial program that you can kind of register for to get into it as well.
So Steve, once again, thanks for a very interesting conversation.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to another edition of the Industrial IoT Spotlight. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at IoT1HQ and to check out our database of case studies on IoT1.com. We help to accelerate digital transformation by advising business leaders on how to integrate IoT technologies into their operations and products. We appreciate your thoughts, suggestions, and of course your reviews. And if you have an interesting project, we'd love to feature you on a future edition. You can write me at eric.walenza@iot1.com.